You know that feeling, that little nagging worry about security online? It's kind of hard to ignore with all the news about cyber attacks, data breaches. It feels relentless sometimes.
It really does.
But today, we're actually going to focus on some big wins. We're doing a deep dive into the major global cybercrime takedowns from 2025.
Absolutely. And it's important, I think, to see these not as just, random events happening here and there.
Right.
This was really a coordinated international push. The scale is, it's pretty remarkable. We're talking thousands of servers, domains taken offline, operations that impacted millions of people.
Millions. It sounds like such a huge number, almost hard to grasp, doesn't it?
It really is.
So our goal here for this deep dive is really to break down these big operations, understand the impact, the real impact, and see how law enforcement is actually, fighting back and adapting.
Yeah, how they're keeping up.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we know this stuff can feel like just a flood of information. So we're going to try and distill it, boil it down to what you really need to know.
And maybe connect some dots, too, because looking at them together, you start to see a bigger picture. You see the landscape, the strategies that are actually working.
Okay. Now, before we get into the nitty-gritty, I just want to give a quick thank you to our sponsors who make these deep dives possible. That's www.breached.company, your go-to for staying up on the latest hacking attempts, and also www.CISOmarketplace.com, the place for cybersecurity pros.
Great resources.
Definitely. Okay, so let's unpack this. What did the cybercrime world even look like in 2025, kind of leading up to all these disruptions?
Well, the first thing that jumps out from the sources is just the sheer scale of the infrastructure involved. Over 2,000 servers seized globally across these operations.
2,000, wow.
Yeah, think of servers as like the digital headquarters for these guys, right? Their storage, their command centers. Taking down that many is a huge blow.
A massive logistical problem for them, I imagine.
Exactly. And it wasn't just one or two countries doing this. We're talking over 20 nations involved. That really underscores the cooperation needed now.
20 nations. That really hits home how borderless this problem is, and the response has to be too. And the victims. The numbers are just staggering. Over 17 million just from those two forums, cracked and nulled.
That's right. 17 million linked just to those takedowns. And that's, just two operations. If you look back at 2024, the broader context, there were 1.3 billion data breach notifications sent out.
Billion. With a B.
Yes. So while these 2025 takedowns are definite wins, significant ones, they're happening against this backdrop of just constant, relentless activity.
Okay, but here's something interesting. Ransom payments. They dropped quite a bit in 2024, right?
Yeah.
Like 35%.
They did, which on the surface sounds fantastic.
Yeah.
But, and this is the twist, our sources also point to a 30% increase in the number of active ransomware groups during that same time.
Okay, wait. Fewer payments, but more groups. How does that work?
Well, it suggests a potential shift, maybe a fragmentation in the whole ransomware scene. Perhaps the bigger, more established players got hit harder, disrupted more often. And that led to, maybe lots of smaller, nimbler groups popping up, which then raises the question, does that make the overall threat easier to handle or actually harder?
So, instead of a few big sharks, it's now a swarm of piranhas, maybe harder to track individually.
That's one way to look at it, yeah. And even with ransom payouts decreasing, the number of data breaches stayed high in 2024. That tells you data theft itself, stealing information, is still a core, very profitable business for these criminals.
Okay, let's dig into one of the big ones then. Operation Talent, targeted, cracked, and nulled, described as two of the world's largest cybercrime forums.
Right.
What made them so significant?
Well, think of them basically as giant online flea markets, but specifically for cybercrime.
Right.
People buying, selling, trading stolen logins, hacking tools, compromised accounts, everything. They were huge hubs. Combined, these platforms had over 10 million registered users.
10 million users.
And hosted over 71 million posts related to cybercrime. Just think about the volume.
That's an entire underground economy right there. Can you give us a bit more on each one? Cracked versus nulled.
Sure. So Cracked, it was active since about March 2018. It got up to over 4 million users, advertised something like 28 million illicit things, items, services, and reportedly made around $4 million in revenue.
$4 million just facilitating crime?
Yeah. And Nulled was even older, started back in 2016. It had over 5 million users, 43 million posts. The estimate there was about $1 million in revenue per year. So these weren't small operations.
Clearly not. The scale is just mind-boggling. So shutting them down has had a real tangible impact.
Oh, absolutely. The operation involves seizing 17 of their servers, those core operational hubs we talked about, plus over 50 other devices, computers, drives.
Physical hardware.
Right. And they seized about €300,000 in cash and assets, directly hitting their finances. And interestingly, the two main arrests happened in Spain.
And again, this was a massive international team effort, right?
Totally crucial. You had the US, Italy, Spain, Germany, France, Greece, Australia, Romania, all working together on talent. You need that kind of cooperation for stuff that crosses borders so easily.
Yeah, so.
And the disruption wasn't just the forums themselves. They also hit associated services like Celix, that was a payment processor some members used, and Stark RDP, which was a hosting service linked to the admins.
RDP, Remote Desktop Protocol.
Exactly. A way to control computers remotely, often misused by criminals for, maintaining access to compromised systems or their own infrastructure anonymously.
Got it. Okay, let's shift gears to Operation Phobos Aeter. This one targeted the 8-base ransomware gang. Ransomware, that feels like something that hits businesses and individuals really hard.
It really does. It can be devastating. So this operation went after the core infrastructure 8-base relied on. Law enforcement managed to seize 27 servers. Big hit to their ability to operate.
And arrests.
Yes, quite significantly, 4 Russian nationals were arrested over in Thailand as part of this.
Arrests always feel like a major step. Shows real consequences. Any other key parts to this operation?
Yeah, something quite proactive happened too. Law enforcement actually warned over 400 companies worldwide. These were companies identified as likely future targets for 8-base.
Wow, a heads up like that could save companies a fortune.
Absolutely. That kind of preventative action is huge. And criminal charges were filed against 2 specific individuals, Roman Bereznoy and Igor Nikolaevich Glebov. Some charges carry potentially up to 20 years in prison.
Serious charges. And again, a big international coalition here.
Yep. 14 countries involved in Phobos Aeter. Even the name Phobos Aeter was a direct reference to the Phobos ransomware strain they used. And the scale of their alleged crimes was significant too. Estimated around $16 million stolen from over 1,000 victims.
1,000 victims. And it wasn't just businesses, right? I think I saw the UN Development Program as a target.
That's right. It really highlights that these attacks aren't just about hitting corporations for profit. They can impact all sorts of organizations, even humanitarian ones. Nobody's really immune.
Okay, let's talk about Zservers and Xhost. This involves something called bulletproof hosting. Sounds intentionally shady.
That's exactly what it is. Bulletproof hosters basically turn a blind eye to illegal activity on their servers. They offer anonymity. They don't cooperate with law enforcement. It's a safe haven for cyber criminals.
So Zservers Xhost was one of these.
A major one. And following international sanctions, authorities moved in and seized 127 of their servers, physically seized them in Amsterdam.
127 servers. Who was behind this and who coordinated the shutdown?
The operators were identified as Russian nationals, Alexander Igorovich Mishin and Alexander Sergeyevich Bolshakov. The sanctions came jointly from the US, the UK, and Australia.
And what exactly were they offering criminals?
Things like anonymous server space, obviously, but also ways to process cryptocurrency payments without much scrutiny, which helps launder money. And some really big names use them. Notorious gangs like Lockbit and Conti were reportedly customers.
So taking them down disrupts those major players too.
Definitely. And there was a really fascinating aspect to this takedown involving Australia.
Oh, yeah. What happened there?
Well, the Australian Signals Directorate, their cyber agency, didn't just help with the shutdown. They actually used their offensive cyber capabilities to go into the Zservers infrastructure and delete massive amounts of stolen data. Specifically, they mentioned deleting 520 gigabytes of sensitive Australian healthcare data, and in total, they wiped something like 250 terabytes of stolen data belonging to victims across Australia, the US, UK, and elsewhere.
Wow. So they weren't just stopping the crime, they were actively undoing some of the damage, reversing the data theft.
Exactly. It's a really powerful example of using cyber tools defensively to directly help victims after the fact. Real aha moment, like you said.
That really is something else. Okay, let's move to malware. The Luma C2 disruption. This was called a major malware operation. How is this different from, say, ransomware?
All right. Luma C2 is what's called an infostealer. So unlike ransomware that locks your files and demands money.
Right, the encryption stuff.
Yeah. Infostealers work much more quietly. They sneak onto a system and just steal information silently collect sensitive data. The victim might not even know it's happening for a long time. Think of it like digital spying.
Okay, more stealthy. What kind of information was it grabbing?
A whole range of things. Browser data was a big one. Saved usernames, passwords, cookies, autofill info, anything that helps them log into your accounts, basically.
So email, banking, social media.
All of that. And critically, Lumacy 2 also went after financial information directly, including crypto wallets. Plus, it grabbed a lot of other personal data useful for identity theft or other scams.
And the scale here was huge, too. I remember seeing a number, 1.7 million documented thefts.
That's the minimum the FBI confirmed. The real number is almost certainly much, much higher. And a key reason Lumacy 2 is so widespread is its business model. Malware as a service.
So they built the tool and then rented it out.
Pretty much. The developers created the malware, the control panels, all the infrastructure, and then other criminals paid a subscription to use it for their own attacks. It just amplifies the reach massively.
Okay, so how did law enforcement actually disrupt something so widespread and distributed?
They went after the command and control infrastructure.
Yeah.
These user panels, essentially the online dashboards the criminals use to manage the infections and view the stolen data.
Makes sense. Cut off that.
Kind of. They initially seized 5 really key domains that hosted these panels, but what was really impressive here was the speed. The Luma operators tried to set up replacement domains almost immediately, and law enforcement identified and seized those new domains within 24 hours. That shows a real step up in agility, in responsiveness. They didn't let them get back on their feet.
That is fast. And this sounds like a good example of public and private sectors working together, too.
Absolutely crucial here. Microsoft, in parallel, was doing its own work and managed to identify and take down an additional 2,300 domains associated with Lumacy 2 operations.
2,300, wow.
Yeah. That kind of partnership, sharing intelligence and capabilities between government agencies and tech companies, it's becoming absolutely essential to have any real impact against this stuff.
Right.
There's even a big reward out now, up to $10 million for info on foreign government actors who might be behind or supporting these kinds of malicious cyber ops.
Okay, so looking back at all these big takedowns from 2025, Operation Talent, Phobos, Aiders, Zservers, Lumacy 2, what are the big picture trends? What are the main implications we should take away from all this?
Well, a few key things really stand out. We already touched on that, fragmentation in the ransomware world. More groups, maybe smaller ones, even if total payments are down. We're also seeing this constant cat and mouse game. Criminals adapt, they change tactics, but law enforcement seems to be getting faster, more coordinated in their responses. That Lumacy 2 takedown, the speed there, is a great example.
And the international cooperation piece feels huge across all of these.
It's really unprecedented, the scale of it now. You had 8 countries on Talent, 14 on Phobos. The Zservers takedown involved sanctions from multiple nations plus action in the Netherlands. It's just fundamental. Cybercrime doesn't respect borders, so the response can't either.
Makes sense. And the financial impact must be significant, too, hitting their wallets.
Definitely. Taking down marketplaces like Cracked and Nulled just vaporized millions in revenue for criminals. And the sustained pressure on ransomware is likely a big factor in that drop in ransom payments we saw.
So it makes life harder for the criminals.
You'd hope so. It creates real operational challenges for them. It might erode trust within their networks. Who can you rely on if platforms keep getting seized? It increases their costs for infrastructure, maybe makes recruitment harder.
And law enforcement gets something out of it, too, besides just the disruption, like intelligence.
Oh, huge intelligence gains. Seizing those forum databases cracked. Nulled gives authorities access to user data, emails, IPs, communications for millions of accounts. That's invaluable for ongoing investigations, mapping out networks, maybe even preventing future attacks.
Right, and there are policy things happening, too, like the UK considering a ban on ransom payments.
Yeah, that's a significant potential development. If major economies start banning payments, it could really change the financial incentives driving ransomware. We'll have to see how that plays out.
And specific sectors are still feeling the heat, right? Healthcare, critical infrastructure.
Absolutely. Those remain prime targets, as we saw with the Zservers data deletion and various ransomware incidents mentioned. The financial sector is always heavily targeted too, obviously. But overall, I think these 2025 takedowns signal a real shift, a more coordinated, sophisticated, and determined international approach to fighting digital crime.
Okay, so wrapping this all up, it really sounds like this big, coordinated global push against cybercrime in 2025 is actually getting results. Tangible results.
Yes, I think that's fair to say. But, and it's big but, The threat isn't going away. It's persistent, it adapts, so vigilance and continued adaptation are key.
Right. The stats are definitely impressive, though. Thousands of servers down, hundreds of arrests, potentially millions spared from further harm.
Exactly. And it reinforces just how vital that international cooperation is, and those public-private partnerships we talked about. They're not just nice to haves, they're essential.
So while these are definitely significant victories, it kind of leaves us with a final question for you, the listener. Okay, criminals adapt. What's the next evolution in their tactics going to look like? And maybe more importantly, how can we individuals, organizations stay ahead? Or at least keep pace? It's something we all need to keep thinking about.
It really is. Staying informed, constantly learning, adapting defenses. It's an ongoing process for everyone.
Well, thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the 2025 cybercrime takedowns. Really appreciate you walking us through all that.
My pleasure. It was good to talk through.
And a final thank you again to our sponsors, www.breached.company and www.cisomarketplace.com, for supporting this kind of in-depth analysis.